this video, we're going to be showing you how to paint the Exalted 8-bound quickly and easily, so they'll be ready to wreak havoc on the tabletop in no time at all. The paints you'll need are shown on screen now. Remember, these are just what we advise and will be using for this guide. It's your hobby, so feel free to paint however you like. This model's got loads of recessed detail, so it's a great candidate for contrast paint, and we'll be using several of them in this guide. If you're new to painting and you'd like to learn more about the basics, you can check out our Citadel Colour Painting Essentials videos. Now the first thing we need to do is undercoat the model, and for this we've used grey cere. First thing we're going to do is apply Guilliman flesh onto the backpack. Now when you're applying contrast paint, make sure you've dried your brush off beforehand, as if there's too much water on the brush, this will dilute the paint. It's a good idea to apply contrast paint heavily but neatly, so work in small sections as this will give you a better effect and even consistency. If you find it pooling too much anywhere, just clean off your brush and use it to soak up the excess. And next we're going to apply skeleton horde to the skulls and the teeth. Don't worry about being too neat, this guide is designed to ensure that we paint over mistakes with the next paint. Now we're going to apply Garagak's sewer onto the skin. As we said at the start of this guide, you can paint however you like, so feel free to choose whichever skin tone you prefer. Contrast is great for getting your models on the tabletop really quickly, as you'll only need to apply one layer. Now it's time to block in all those armour panels, and for these we're going to use Blood Angels Red. Make sure you shake your contrast paints thoroughly before using them, as this will give you a better finish. And also ensure you leave your paint to dry before you move on to the next stage. And as before, you really don't need to worry about being too neat with this. We'll be painting the trim in a minute anyway. And the next thing we're going to do is apply Black Templar to the cloth, pipes, horns and weapons, and also the wrappings on that axe there. As this is a darker colour, we need to be a little bit neater here, as it's a little trickier to cover up any mistakes. But if you do find yourself making some mistakes, you can just go back in with the previous layers and correct them. When you're using lots of contrast paint, it can take a while for everything to come together, but trust me, stick with the process and it'll look great by the end. And the next thing we're going to do is move on to the metallics. So we're going to look at the silver areas first and base coat these with lead belcher. Now unlike the other paints, this is a base paint, so we need to thin it down with a little bit of water before we apply it. It's best to build it up on the miniature in a few layers, as this will give us a better finish. Now we're going to move on to the brass areas. So this is the trim on the miniature and also some details on the weapons. And for these, we're going to use Rune Lord brass. So just like before, make sure to thin it down with a little bit of water before you apply it to the miniature. There are a lot of brass details, so it will take some time, but it'll be well worth it and it will really bring the miniature together. When you've finished using metallic paints, it's a good idea to change your paint water. This will just stop any metallic flakes getting into your non-metallic paints. And now it's time to shade all those metallic details. For this, we're going to use Agrak's Earthshade. Something you might like to try here is to neatly place some of that shade onto the very edges of the red armour where it meets the trim. Doing this will create more depth on the model. And the final stage of the guide is to apply an all-over dry brush of Screaming Skull. So you've worked really hard on your miniature and it's looking awesome. So it's really important to make sure that this is a very subtle dry brush. The key thing to remember here is that we can always add more layers of dry brushing, but it can be quite tricky to correct an over-enthusiastic dry brush. So less is more. When you're building up the dry brush on the miniature, move the brush in anti-clockwise and clockwise motions or in back and forth motions depending on which part of the miniature you're working on. Back and forth motions tend to suit the harder edges of the miniature like the weapons, while circular motions are better for the larger, flatter areas. And when you've finished, give the model a quick dust off with a clean brush. An all-over dry brush like this is a really great technique for achieving a highlight all over the miniature really quickly. And there we are, your Exalted 8-bound is finished and looking fantastic. Now you can see that our model is based, and if you'd like to learn all about basing, you can check out our video all about it. Well, we hope you've enjoyed the video and we'll see you next time. Bye!